Good afternoon, everyone. I Dora, and I welcome you all to today's stream. Hello, Boyd. Hello, Fox. Hold on, I just realized something. Let me go get a drink because I know this is gonna be a long one. Alrighty, now I got a drink. Always remember, whenever you're reading a story to a bunch of people, always have a drink on hand. So, after about 6 months, I realized how long it is. I do apologize for taking so long to get back to it. I am going to be reading through Star Trek: The Sorrows of Empire by David Mack. Where we last left off, Spock was dealing with several assassination attempts, and we have been seeing the effects of Spock's attempts to reform the Empire, allowing other captains and other ships to start implementing um, similar policies, like the abolishment of the use of the agonizer and the agony booth. Hello, Uchu. Oh yeah, Uchi. Are we good for System Shock 2 tomorrow? Just wanted to ask you. But without further ado, let's get started. Chapter 19. The Name of Action. Marlena moved in swift strides down the corridor to her quarters. The Vulcan guards posted outside the door saluted her as she approached. She returned the salute as the door slid open and she passed between them. The door shut behind her. She searched the compartment for her husband. Spock was seated at a computer terminal in a small space beyond a smoked glass panel with an arched doorway. The lights were dimmed, and the faint haze of vaguely citrus-scented incense smoke lingered overhead. She took a few hesitant steps towards him. You said it was urgent. Beckoning her closer, Spock said, Join me. Marlena crossed the room, acclimating easily to the slightly higher gravity and warm, dry air. Neither environmental detail matched the intensity of Vulcan's natural climate because Spock had tempered them for her benefit. Positioning herself behind his shoulder, she asked, What happened? He gestured to the monitor on his desk. Watch and listen, he said, initiating the playback of what appeared to be a classified subspace message. The visage of a human man with dark brown skin, a broad nose, and close-shorn, graying hair appeared on the screen. He wore the uniform of a Starfleet captain. Admiral Spock, my name is Clark Terrell. I am the commanding officer of the Sagittarius. I can't pronounce that to save my life. Currently assigned to recon duty in the Taurus Reach under the command of Commodore Diego Reyes. The file I have sent you contains extensive documentation of the classified mission being directed from Starbase 47, known out here as Vanguard. Whatever the original purpose of Operation Vanguard might have been, I think the evidence I've sent you will convince you has gone off the rails, and that it poses a genuine threat to the security of the Empire, and maybe the safety of the galaxy at large. Whatever you choose to do with this intelligence, I'd like to ask for your help in getting a transfer for a civilian scientist named Carol Marcus and her teenage son, Davis, off that station. I'm sure you understand I'm taking a tremendous risk by sharing this information with you. Captain Zhao of the Endeavor assures me that you're a man who can be trusted. For his sake, and mine, I hope he's right. Terrell leaned forward and pressed a button. The image on the screen changed to a slideshow of written reports, ship's logs, sensor data, and a molecular map of the most complex string of genetic data Marlena has ever seen. Spock looked up at him. 10 years ago in the Taurus Reach, then Commodore Matt Decker and his crew found a complex genome in what appears to be a simple life form. That discovery led to the rapid deployment of a Watchtower-class starbase hundreds of light years from Earth, well outside the normal bounds of the Empire's territory. What is that genetic string? Marlena asks. Unknown, Spock said. However, the logs provided by Captain Terrell suggest that the personnel attached to Operation Vanguard has made other discoveries in that contested region of space, and that Commodore Reyes is abusing the station's resources in remote location to amass personal power. Marlena frowned. Why are Decker and the Empress letting Reyes get away with this? Starfleet is overextended, Spock said. Reyes has fortified his position by forging an accord with a foreign power or some other political actor, perhaps both, and whatever he controls from Starbase 47 is sufficiently dangerous that neither the Empress nor the Grand Admiral wish to challenge him directly. Wonderful. She perused the on-screen data and noted several gaps. Didn't Terrell send any data on Reyes' allies or resources? He may have, Spock said. However, the transmission was jammed before it was completed. Terrell's message was intact, but the data file was not. Can we ask him to resend it? The Sagittarius was destroyed by a warp core breach 10 minutes after he sent the message to me. Marlena began to form a more complete mental picture of the situation. You think Reyes jammed the message and took out the Sagittarius? That would be consistent with the facts in hand. She folded her arms. Much as I hate to open another front in our war on the status quo, I think we need to move against Reyes. Agreed, Spock said. She sat on the edge of Spock's desk. Where do we start? We will investigate the situation in the Taurus Reach and assess the threat potential to the Empire and the galaxy at large, Spock said. Next, we will need to cultivate an ally inside Reyes' command staff, preferably someone with access to the inner workings of Operation Vanguard. Shooting her husband an incredulous look, Marlena replied, Tall order. That could take months, or longer depending on how tight Reyes' security is. Perhaps, Spock said, but men like Reyes inspire treachery. I'm confident that with perseverance, we can turn one of his officers into a spy for our cause. She admired Spock's optimism, even though she did not share it. All right, she said, and then what? Then, he said gravely, we will send to Prin. Looks like Commodore Reyes is on Spock's hit list now. 2276. Chapter 20. A Shell of a Man. Waves broke against jagged rocks and churned into foam. Marlena stood up in the glorious, warm-pounding surf and waded towards the beach, imagining herself a modern-day Venus, rising from the sea to stride an alien shore. She and Spock were on the third full day of leave on Ryston. Most of Enterprise's crew was on the planet's surface, at a resort location on the mainland of the largest continent. She and Spock had the privilege of a private island, complete with a luxury cabana, and a pair of anti-grav equipped robots programmed to bring them food or drinks anywhere they went. A skeleton crew manned the ship in orbit. Also still on board was a cadre of Vulcan operatives recruited by Spock to serve as personal guards. During the Admiral's absence, his sentinels kept watch over his and Marlena's quarters to prevent unwanted intrusions, searches, or insertions of surveillance technology. Marlena squeezed the excess water from her raven hair as she patted ashore. She savored the moment, the soft crashing of waves, a gentle tropical breeze of salt air, the warmth of the sun, powdery hot sand beneath her feet. It was all she had ever dreamed heaven might be. Spock, true to form, lingered on dry land, just beyond the touch of the sea. As Marlena walked towards him, he crouched and sifted handfuls of sand through his fingers. The last grains fell away, revealing a pale shape in his palm. It was a seashell, shaped like a miniature conch. Spock held it between his thumb and forefinger and studied it with a scientist's keen gaze. Standing over her husband, Marlena struck a seductive pose. See anything you like, my love? He brought the shell closer to his eyes. It is fascinating. Oh, you got ads, Fox? Yep. Strangely enough, OBS is not alerting me when ad break is coming, but that's right. Streamlabs is the one that does that. Right. Well, I'll give it a minute for the ads to finish before I continue. Alrighty, Fox. Welcome back. She reached down, clasped his free hand, and tried to pull him towards the water. Come on, she said. The ocean's calling. It felt as if she were trying to tug a mountain. Even leaning sharply and throwing her weight into the effort, she couldn't make Spock budge. It was too strong and too balanced to be moved against his will. Relenting, Marlena let herself fall to the sand beside him. She waved over one of the anti-grav service bots, which was holding her margarita. She liberated her lemon-inly libation from a nook on the floating disc and took a sip. Its tartness made her lips pucker. After she swallowed, she squinted against the tropical sun and saw Spock still eyeing the seashell in his hand. What's so captivating about that shell? She asked. He lowered his hand as he lifted a brow in a pensive expression. I respect the patience it represents, he said. It is a product of a simple intelligence, but able to withstand the inexorable forces of nature. Turning it slowly, he continued. Formed by a slow aggregation of calcium carbonate into a shape both durable and aesthetically pleasing. It is a triumph of engineering and efficiency, a formidable armor composed of that which it found in abundance. Leaning forward against Spock's arm, Melina replied, Not that it did much good. Recoiling from Spock's stare, she added, I mean, whatever made it is dead, and it either rotted away inside his useless shell or got chewed up by scavengers. The shell might be pretty, but what good did it really do? A deep, thoughtful silence fell upon Spock. He stared at the shell in his hand as if he were prying the secrets of the universe from his spiral cavity. When at last he broke his silence, he said only, Indeed. Worried she might have upset him or quashed the little enjoyment he was taking in their holiday, she turned her energies towards seduction. She planted small kisses up the side of his arm to his shoulder, then into the space between his clavicle and neck, all the while tracing the lines of his torso with her wandering fingertips. Forget the shell, she whispered. Let me intrigue you with some other new wonders I've learned. He caressed the side of her face and stroked his fingers through her hair, but then he pulled away. This is not a good time, he says. Flustered, Marlena made an exaggerated show of pivoting to one side and then the other, to emphasize their isolation. No ship? No crew? No orders, she said with a coquettish smile. It seems like the best time we'll ever have. Our locale is conducive to romance, Spock said. However, I am overdue for my contraceptive injection. Rolling her eyes, Marlena replied, So what? Your last injection couldn't have completely worn off just yet, and even if it has. She stroked his face with her palm. Would that really be such a bad thing? Admittingly, the risk of conception at this time is low, but it would be best not to leave such matters to chance. He reached for a communicator on the blanket behind him. Dr. Mbenga is on shore leave, but Nurse Chapel should be able to beam down a hyperspray containing the injection I require. Marlena reached out and held his arm. Spock, please, isn't it time? Time for what? For us to start a family, she sighed. We've been married for 9 years already, and I'm not getting any younger. Wrinkling his brow momentarily, Spock replied, With hormone therapy, there's no reason you cannot safely bear children for at least another... You're missing the point, Spock. I want us to have children. Not someday, not in a few years, now. Oh. There. A hint of a frown darkened Spock's countenance. That would be a very dangerous choice, he said. A starship is no place for children, even under the best of circumstances. And our current situation is far from ideal. Furthermore, a man in my position cannot afford to sire offspring. Our enemies would use them against us. With surprising tenderness, he cupped his palm against her face. When our position is more secure, then we can discuss starting a family. Fine, she said, far from mollified. We'll wait. For now. As Spock flipped open his communicator and asked Nurse Chapel to beat him down a hypo spray of male contraceptive, Marlena willed herself to be patient for the sake of her husband and the task that lay before them. But as she drank in the paroxysmal seclusion, in her heart she suspected that she was being offered a glimpse into her future. Bright, barren, and lonely. And no matter how long she waited, Spock's answer was never going to change. April. And that ends chapter 20. Starting to feel at least a little bit bad for Marlena. Also, given that this started out as a short story, if some chapters kind of feel like out of left field, just want you to know that the version I'm reading is the expanded standalone version, which expands on the story that was first released in Class Empires. So yeah, there's two different versions of this. If y'all want to see how the original reads, I can recommend Glass Empires. It has two other short stories. One takes place during the 22nd century of Star Trek Enterprise, and then the third story takes place in the 24th century of the Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. Interestingly enough, though, this is so far the only short story of one of three compilation novels that got its own standalone story. Anyhow, let's continue. 2277. Chapter 21. The Dark of Reason. Spock stood near the back of the instructor's control room behind a bulkhead of the Academy Starship Bridge simulator and observed the main viewer in silence. On screen, his protege, Savick, now a midshipman first class, occupied the simulator's center seat as she enjoyed the infamous Kobayashi Maru test. Basically a no-win scenario, but... Captain, said a cadet man in communications post, we're receiving a distress signal from inside the neutral zone. Audio only. Savick nodded to the other cadet. Put it through, she said. A male voice, faint and distant sounding, scratched from the overhead speakers. It cut out intermittently, replacing parts of words or sentences with static or silence. The Terran freighter Kobayashi Maru, our depth computer map drifted into enemy territory, and we need to meet. Please respond. Repeat, this is the Terran freighter Kobayashi Maru. Enough, Savick said to her communications officer. Hail them. We've tried, Captain, said the other cadet. No response. Their message is automated, running on a loop. Swiveling her chair forward, Savick asked, Helm, do we have a fix on Kobayashi Maru's coordinates? Aye, sir, replied the Andorian chime at the helm. 90 seconds away at maximum warp. Plot an intercept course, but do not cross the neutral zone, Savick said. Course laid in, answered the Andorian. Engaged. All decks, red alert. Battle stations. On the simulator's view screen, stars streaked past, and even through the control room bulkhead, Spock heard the imitated hum of warp engines in overdrive, and felt the thrumming pulses through the deck. The red alert klaxon whooped 3 times inside the ersatz bridge, and a palpable tension emanated from the cadets gathered in his claustrophobic confines. Dropping out of warp in 5 seconds, reported the helmsman. 3, 2, 1. He pressed a button on his console, and the image on the simulator's viewer reverted to one of stars and darkness. Tactical report, Savick commanded. At the sensor post, a Caitian female peered into a hood display. The Kobayashi Maru is directly ahead, Captain. just inside the neutral zone. A male Tellarite, whose role in the simulation was to serve as Savic's first officer, stepped beside her chair and suggested in a low voice, "We can reach the Kobayashi Maru in 10 seconds at warp 5. Lock on a tractor beam in 5 seconds and pull her back to our side in 15 seconds. In and out in 30 seconds flat, Captain." Savick threw a pointed stare at her XO. "And if the Klingons are under cloak beside the Kobayashi Maru, lying in ambush?" The Tellarite turned towards the Cation cadet. "Is there any sign of Klingon vessels in the area, Lieutenant?" Checking her sensor display, the Cation replied, "No, sir." Her answer seemed to puff up the Tellarite with smug satisfaction. Savick turned her chair to face the science station. "Lieutenant, scan for unusual tachyon disperse patterns in the vicinity of the Kobayashi Maru, and then scan for evidence that its inertial drift is being affected by microgravity effects." "Aye, Captain," said the Cation, returning to her work. The bridge was quiet for several seconds while the Cation conducted her laborious scans and analysis. Every passing moment seemed to make the Tellarite XO angry. "We're wasting time," he protested to Savick. "We should recover that ship before the Klingon do come by to investigate." "Patience, Mr. Glar," Savick said, cool and unhurried. The Cation looked up from her sensor hood. "Captain, there are elevated tachyon levels in close proximity to the Kobayashi Maru. Interaction patterns suggest 3 discrete sources for those particles." Savick nodded. "And do you detect evidence of microgravity effects upon the Kobayashi Maru, Lieutenant?" "Yes, sir, I do. My reading suggests it's being acted upon by at least 3 objects, each with a mass of just less than 1 million gross tons." Casting an accusatory stare at her XO, Savick asked, "Do you still advocate for crossing the neutral zone, Mr. Glar?" The Tellarite had no reply. Savick faced forward and issued orders for icy detachment. "Armed photon torpedoes, full spread. Lock them onto the Kobayashi Maru." Her helmsman threw a questioning look over his shoulder, prompting Savick to add sternly, "That is an order." The Andorian turned his focus back towards the console and carried out Savick's commands. "Torpedoes armed and locked, Captain." "Fire," Savick said. A ruffled screech of magnetic launchers reverberated through the deck and bulkheads, and a cluster of blue projectiles raced away on the simulator's main view screen, before vanishing into warp speed. A few seconds passed, then, even as the bridge's screen showed nothing but a placid vista of stars, the Cation at the sensor console reported, "The Kobayashi Maru has been destroyed, Captain." "Secure from red alert," Savick said. "Resume original heading. Oh, and Mr. Chilira's?" The Andorian helmsman looked back at Savick as she added, "The next time you hesitate to carry out one of my orders, you will be disciplined. Is that clear?" "Aye, Captain," said the Andorian. "Good. Carry on." "Oh, add in about 2 minutes? Okay." In the control room with Spock, Captain John Spretter, the senior instructor, entered the test results into the computer and declared, "All right, open it up." The staff of technicians, programmers, and engineers shut down the simulator. Inside the model bridge, bright overhead lights snapped on. The bulkhead separating it from the control room began to retract. The cadets got up from their posts and started moving towards an exit into an amphitheater-style lecture hall. Are you on the mobile version of Twitch, people? Because if you are, I think that might be the reason why you haven't gotten warned. I can't say much for the... Oh, okay. But yeah, Twitch usually lets people know when an ad is on the way. Making sure I can take a drink between passages. Spretter, a wiry middle-aged man with white hair and green eyes, gestured at Savick and asked Spock, "Want to talk to her before your debriefing?" Not yet ready to put his disappointment into words, Spock replied, "No." He turned and left the control room, wondering whether his trust in Savick might have been misplaced after all. Oof. Less than a day after her graduation from Starfleet Academy, Saavik stepped off a transporter pad aboard the ISS Enterprise. Admiral Spock stood before her, her hands folded behind his back. "Welcome aboard, Ensign," he said. "Thank you, Admiral." She reached back towards the pad for her duck. "Leave it," Spock said. "A yeoman will bring it to your quarters directly." He stepped toward the door, which hissed open ahead of him, and paused at its threshold. Looking back, he said, "Walk with me, Ensign." "Yes, sir," Saavik said, falling in behind him. Are the ads playing, Fox?" "Hmm, interesting." "Oh, you were on ad break this whole time, weren't you, Fox?" "Jeez, I didn't know." Oof. She follows Fox through the bustle. Oh. Thank you, Void, for the gift sub. She follows Spock through the bustling corridors of his flagship. The crew was occupied with the task that preceded a departure after a port call. A steady undercurrent of calm chatter filtered out of open doorways and mingled with the crackle and sizzle of engineers working with plasma cutters. Oh, Void! Five subs! Thank you, Void. Thank you, Void. Let's see. A steady undercurrent of comm chatter filtered out of open doorways and mingled with the crackle and sizzle of engineers working with plasma cutters and ion welders, which tainted the ship's normally scent-free atmosphere with a hint of ozone. Saavik was careful to linger just a fraction of a step behind Spock's left shoulder, rather than presume to stride beside him as if she were his equal. In a low voice, Spock said, "Speaking as your mentor, I find myself troubled by your solution to the Kobayashi route." Perplexed, Saavik asked, "With what part of my performance do you find fault, Admiral?" Spock withheld his answer as a group of enlisted personnel passed them. He led her inside a waiting turbolift. "Deck 15, Section Bravo," he said to the computer as the door shut, and then he turned to face Saavik. "I question your decision to resolve the scenario by destroying the Kobayashi Maru." His criticism surprised her. "I do not understand," she said. "My solution to the test was entirely logical." "By what line of reasoning?" She mentally composed her answers as the turbolift car raced vertically and then laterally towards the Enterprise's primary hull. The freighter was outside Terran space, but not yet inside Klingon space. However, it was in an area where travel is prohibited by interstellar treaty. If its crews navigated into the neutral zone on purpose, then they were guilty of criminal violation of interstellar law that risked the security of the Terran Empire as a whole, and as such were subjected to summary execution. The turbolift stopped, and its doors opened. She continued her answer as she and Spock exited the lift and walked through a gently curving corridor. If the vessel's distress call had been forged by the Klingons to lure us into a trap and provide them a rationale for breaking the treaty, which I believe was the case, then his crew was engaged in an active war for the Klingon defense forces while operating under false colors. Under the terms of interstellar law, they were therefore subject to preemptive attack. Spock nodded, as if he were giving serious consideration to the merits of her argument. "We have a bot! Void! Devour!" We got another one. Wow, Void is eating good today. This was the first time in a while that I had bots attack enter my streams. Spock nodded as if he were giving serious consideration to the merits of her argument. Then he asked, "Did you at any time consider the possibility that the crew of the Kobayashi Maru might themselves have been lured off course by the Klingons? Or that perhaps the ship did suffer a navigational malfunction that led them off course before rendering them unable to maneuver at warp?" "I deemed such considerations irrelevant," Savick replied. There was a note of suspicion in Spock's voice as he asked, "Why?" They arrived at the door of Savick's quarters. She stopped and turned to face her mentor. "In either of the situations you proposed, the Kobayashi Maru would have been co-opted by the Klingons as a tactical asset. By destroying it, we deprived them of that asset without risking escalation of hostilities. Because the Klingons have no claim or the jurisdiction over Terran vessels or citizens. Furthermore, because the incident transpired inside the neutral zone, the Klingons would have been unable to protest any collateral damage that might have been inflicted on their local ships, since the Treaty of Organia expressly bans them from operating there." "Essentially true," Spock said. "But what of the crew of the Kobayashi Maru? Were they still alive? Would they have deserved to be rescued?" "Irrelevant," Savick said. She unlocked the door of her quarters. It slid open. She stepped onto the doorway to hold it open while she finished her conversation with Spock. "The rescue of civilians is not a declared function of Starfleet. Keep in mind that this is the Mirror Universe's Imperial Starfleet, not the Prime Universe's Starfleet." I figured I'd just mention that. "What if it was?" Spock. "Oh, hype chest. What's this?" new emote. Okay. Spock's father is named Sarek. Savick is Savick does exist in the Prime Universe. She is in Star Trek 3. And she was meant to be in Star Trek 4 if it wasn't for a problem revolving around the actress and, well, some issues with the filming and stuff like that. Effectively, it was conditions that the actress did not find agreeable and decided to leave because of it. Can't blame her. Okay, what if it was? Spock asked. "Let me pose a new tactical scenario. What if you were not only required by Starfleet regulations to try and defend the lives of the Kobayashi Maru civilian crew, but in fact had been expressly ordered by a superior officer to mount a rescue operation of the vessel and its personnel?" It was an outrageous proposition. Given the same tactical parameters? Yes. Savick pondered tactical disaster that would unfold if she led a lone starship into hostile action against 3 Klingon heavy cruisers. She shook her head. "I'm sorry, Admiral," she said. "Such a scenario would have no viable strategy for victory." "Correct," Spock said. "That is a circumstance upon which I want you to reflect as you contemplate your future as a Starfleet officer." That ends chapter 21. I do like how they're also developing Savick as well, especially considering how much of a role she will play later on in the Mirror Universe novels. I am glad to see that we're seeing her grow during her career at Starfleet. Sure, there are some stumblings here and there, but truth be told, a lot of this could be from the fact that she was learning as a member of the Terran Empire Starfleet. And it's kind of mentioned earlier in the novel that their training regimen is kind of harsh. So Spock's idea of her training is kind of in line with Starfleet's, but the way he wants her to figure things out is entirely, well, Vulcan. Chapter 22. Falls the Shadow. Carol Marcus awoke to a hand clamping over her mouth and nose. "Not a word," a male voice commanded her. Shut up and don't fight. She was pulled from her bed dressed only in her nightclothes. Two men in Starfleet security uniforms dragged her kicking and flailing through the main room of her quarters. Another pair of security officers had gagged her son, who struggled futilely in their grasp as they carried him out behind his mother. They were hauled quickly through Vanguard's corridors, which were strangely deserted. Can't have anyone see our last moments, Marcus thought bitterly. No point disappearing us if anyone sees what really happened. The turbolift ride seemed longer than usual. Must be the adrenaline, Marcus reasoned, trying to calm her thoughts. Every little moment was being stretched by her fear. Finally, they arrived at what seemed to be a terminal destination, an airlock on one of the station's lowest levels. Marcus and her son were pushed inside the airlock chamber where the rest of her staff from the vault was already corralled. Two of her colleagues helped her and David stand up. Standing in the doorway of the airlock's open inner hatch was one of Reyes' top commanding officers, Lieutenant Ming Jiang. Though he calls himself a scientist, his true role aboard Vanguard had been to serve as Reyes' watchdog in the vault. For most of the last decade, he had haunted Marcus's every movement in the lab, and he had documented the team's every discovery in painstaking detail for the Commodore. Hulking security division goons stood on either side of Zhang, and the phasers leveled at the civilian researchers they had herded into the airlock. John smirked. Dr. Marcus, I'd like to thank you and your team for coming on such short notice. Go to hell, Marcus replied, determined to die with some pride. Addressing the group, John continued. You have all done remarkable work, and Commodore Reyes wants you to know how grateful he is for your efforts. However, now that he has what he needs from you, the greatest weapon in the history of the Terran Empire, he no longer requires your services. You are, as the expression goes, loose ends, and the Commodore wants you tied off. Marcus had always known this day would come. She just hadn't expected to arrive so soon. She grabbed her son and pulled him to her side. Oh no, bro, indeed. John pressed a button on the control pad beside the airlock. The inner door closed with a heavy thud. Then came a soft crackle as he activated the intercom between the airlock and the corridor. Turning to his security guard, Zhang said, Gentlemen, for the sake of plausible deniability, it would be best if none of you sees what happens next. When none of the guards took the hint, he added with a more forceful tone, Dismissed! Security squad walked away. Zhang watched them leave, then he began entering the commands of the airlock's control pad. Looking through the door's hexagonal window of transparent aluminum, he said, Dr. Marcus, I need you and your team to listen to me carefully. We don't have much time. Excuse me? Pay attention, he snapped. In a few moments, I'm going to open the outer door, but I'm not ejecting you folks into space. You won't be able to see it, but it's going to be a ship docked on the other side. Confused looks passed between Marcus and the other scientists. What are you talking about, John? What's going on? You're being extracted, he said, rescued by Starfleet intelligence, on orders from Admiral Spock. I need to bypass the sensors on this airlock so it'll look to the ops center like I've spaced you. Putting on display of bravado, David asked accusatory, How could a ship be docked here without station's crew knowing it? It'll be cloaked, John said. As if on cue, there was a gentle thump against the airlock's exterior bulkhead. Next came the sound of magnetic clamps being secured, and a hiss of atmosphere flooding into a hard-sealed passageway. The light above the outer door changed from red to green, but Marcus still saw nothing but space and stars through his viewport. Remember to lay low, John said, checking his chrono. He added, because as of 0319, you're all officially dead. He smiled. Good luck. Then, with a press of a button, he opened the outer door. Instead of the cold pull of vacuum, Marcus felt a gust of warm, dry air. Out of the darkness, rippling into view like a mirage, was a narrow passageway to another airlock, one with a decidedly non-Starfleet design. Standing on the far airlock was a young male Edoan in a Starfleet uniform. Waving Marcus and the others forward, Come on, he said. Hurry! We can't stay more than a minute. Pushing her son ahead of her, Marcus led her research team onto the cloaked vessel, where more Starfleet personnel met them and shepherded them down dim corridors whose surface had a green cast. As soon as the last of her people was aboard the cloaked ship, She heard the airlock doors thud close, followed by the clang of the magnetic clamps releasing. Then she felt the low vibration of impulse engines kicking in, and she realized in utter surprise that she was finally free of Commodore Reyes and his station of horrors. Her son squeezed her hand and asked, "Mom, where are we going?" "I don't know," she said, seeing no point in lying. "But wherever we end up, we're going to owe Admiral Spock a very large debt of gratitude." 6 weeks, 2 days, and 11 hours after his last port of call on Vulcan, Enterprise was following an elliptical patrol route that kept in close proximity to most of the Enterprise's core systems. Despite a number of requests by Spock to have Enterprise assigned to deep space exploration, Starfleet Command insisted on keeping the vessel near the heart of the Terran Empire. The curtness with which Spock's entreaties had been rebuffed led to him suspect that the hand of Emperor Sato III was behind Enterprise's currently less than glamorous mission profile. He glanced at the warp-restored starlight on the bridge's view screen, and then looked around to observe his crew at work. The Enterprise's bridge had seemed darker to him since his 2271 refit. Its curves more pronounced, its shadows deeper. Overall, the more somber ambience suited Spock, who found his previous incarnations garishly bright. Another definite improvement of the refit. Oh, looks like we got an ad break going. Oh no, it says it starts. Okay. Overall, the more somber ambience suited Spock, but found his previous incarnations garishly bright. Another definite improvement of the refit was that the chairs had been securely fastened to the deck and equipped with optional safety braces. Though little more than a half measure in a pitched battle, they nonetheless represented progress. So here we're kind of moving from the TOS style of the Constitution class, and we're now moving to the movie era. As I believe this is the Enterprise refit as of Star Trek The Motion Picture, but mirror universe. Returning his attention to the day's reports, he was pleased to note that according to several metrics used for evaluating the performance of his ship and crew, efficiency has improved across the board by a significant degree in the years since he abolished the use of agonizers. He expected the gains to level off over time. Instead, his crew continued to excel. Deck officers' logs also indicated a steadier, higher level of crew morale. "Admiral," said Lieutenant Palmer, interrupting Spock's ruminations, "you have an incoming transmission on the coded subspace frequency." "I will take it in my quarters," Spock said, rising from his chair. He nodded at his first officer across the deck. "Mr. Decker, you have the call." Spock stepped out of the turbolift near his quarters. He walked quickly, clearing his thoughts. As soon as he was inside his cabin, he locked the door behind him and crossed the compartment to his desk. On screen was the emblem of the Empire. He keyed in a command to initiate playback of the coded message. A masculine computer voice replied, "State your name, rank, and command code for voice print verification." "Spock, Admiral. Command code 49 Kilo 71 Sierra Blue. Command code and voice print verified." The Imperial emblem was replaced by the face of the print. "Greetings, Admiral," she said. "Operation Vanguard has been terminated. Have all mission objectives been fulfilled?" "Yes, sir. Vanguard is destroyed. Commodore Reyes and his accomplices are dead. Were you able to extract Dr. Marcus and her son?" "Yes. They are safe, as planned. Were you able to acquire the sample and data from Jean?" "Affirmative." "Well done." You might also be interested to know that Captain Zhao, while perhaps a bit more ambitious than we were led to expect, seems amenable to our cause. Idly stroking his goateed chin, Spock replied, "Very good." The prince stared at Spock for a moment before she added, "I trust you remember the conditions under which I accepted this mission, Admiral." "I do," Spock said, "and I will honor it." He entered the necessary commands on his computer interface, and then he returned his attention to the prince. "I have transmitted your notice of honorable discharge from Starfleet to the Admiralty. A copy of that notice will appear on your monitor momentarily." He heard a soft feedback tone from the Prince's computer over the subspace channel. She reviewed the document, then bowed her head. "Thank you, Admiral." Give Captain Zhao my regards, Spock said, and ask him to contact me as soon as he can do so safely. I will. She raised her hand in the Vulcan salute. Live long and prosper, Spock. He mirrored the gesture. Honor and long life, T'Pring. T'Pring cut the channel. The screen went dark. Spock turned it off. The estimated word of Vanguard's destruction would reach Earth within the hour, though it was sometimes difficult to predict Empress Satos III's reactions. He felt fairly confident he knew how she would take this news. Hope y'all are enjoying the story so far. I've actually been reading this during my break times at work. And every single time I read this, I always enjoy it more and more. Because unlike the shows, they kind of show the Terran Empire in a different way. Because you kind of see where in the Mirror Universe, it's not really just the darkest reflections of existing characters. You also see things as more complicated than they really are. Now, the ad break is starting, so I'm going to wait until the ads are over before I continue. Oh, I also had to get a different background image for this one because I couldn't find the one I was using before, so I took a screenshot from the episode Mirror Mirror. Yeah. It also gives you an idea as to how the uniforms looked in the Mirror Universe during the TOS era. I can't really give a photo of the ones how it looks in the movie era. But Star Trek Shattered Universe does give a interesting look on how the later movies had it look. Alrighty, it looks like the ad break has ended, so I'm going to continue. Who is responsible for this travesty? Screamed Empress Hoshi Sato III. Her advisors cringed and leaned away from the war room's conference table as she stood at its head, glaring with murderous anger at the lot of them. Not one of them seemed willing to look in her direction. Leaning forward on her fist, she arbitrarily parceled out abuse. Minister Nadeus, she said to her Bolian Minister of Intelligence, we've lost a Watchtower-class starbase. More than 3,000 Starfleet personnel are dead. Why didn't your people detect this threat before it inflicted such casualties? As Nidus hemmed and hawed without producing an answer, the Empress directed her wrath at her Shellan Foreign Minister. Minister Pallades, I can't pronounce some of these alien names. Why weren't you aware that Commodore Reyes was negotiating his own alliance with the Klingon Empire? Are you so underworked that you turned a blind eye to the emergence of a new rival state on our border, raised up using your own weapons so you would have more to do? Fields evinced his shame by retracting his head a few centimeters deeper into his carapace. The Empress slapped her palm on the table. I want a name. Who did this? And don't any of you ever try to lay the blame on Reyes. I can't visit my revenge on a dead man. I want a living, breathing villain I can crucify for this. Silence reigned in the yawning darkness of the underground meeting room. Somewhere in the middle of the table, a man cleared his throat and leaned forward. He was a middle-aged human who looked to be of Japanese ancestry. His frame was lean, his face was gaunt, and his silvery gray hair was styled in a brush cut. If I may venture speculation, Your Majesty. Very well, Admiral Nagora, Majesty, he replied. A review of Vanguard's logs suggests the station's crew was killed by the escape of an alien entity known as a Shidai. which Reyes had been holding hostage. Long-range scans showed the station was already damaged from within when it was destroyed by the Tholians. The non-administered Natus. The intelligence ministry can confirm that the Tholians and Klingons had engaged in several skirmishes throughout the Taurus Reach. The party that seemed to have had the most to gain in this crisis was the Tholian Assembly. Grand Admiral Matthew Decker heaved a disgusted sigh. Can we knock off the kid gloves bullshit, please? He shot a scornful stare at Nogura before turning to the Empress and continuing. Those long-range scans were provided by the Endeavor, which also happens to have led to an attack on Vanguard. Captain Zhao, he rolled his eyes, forgive me, Commodore Zhao, is the one who made the public spectacle of Reyes' power grab in the making. If not for Zhao's mutiny, we could have replaced Reyes quietly and retained control over the Taurus Reach. Now the entire sector is in chaos because Zhao absconded with the Sixth Fleet. Doing Decker's voice through the throat. But it's worth it. A cold fire of anger swelled in the Empress's chest as she asked Decker, is Zhao the one I want to destroy? Eventually, Decker said, but Zhao is only a symptom. I think it's time we address the cause. Decker inserted a data card into a slot on the table and accessed its contents, which were rendered as holograms at intervals along the table. These comm logs showed a pattern of transmission between Zhao's ship and the Tholian Assembly, which would be damning by itself, but more importantly is who made them. Projection change showed the face of a Vulcan woman. Her name is Pt.3, Decker said. She's an agent of Starfleet intelligence. Until 6 weeks ago, she was posted on Vulcan when she had frequent contact with Ambassador Sarek. Calling up more data, Decker continued. 8 hours ago, she received an honorable discharge from Starfleet service authorized by Admiral Spock, who, it should be noted, 2 years ago received a packet of classified data regarding Operation Vanguard from Pt.3 of Sagittarius. I've seen enough, Hoshi said. For years, Admiral Spock has sowed dissension in Starfleet and been a magnet for insurrectionists throughout the Empire. Now he dares to order the premature termination of an imperially mandated military operation. He has gone too far. Adopted as regal a bearing as her slender physique allowed, the Empress tilted her chin and said with icy hall to her, Grand Admiral Decker, terminate Admiral Spock immediately. So ends chapter 22. All I will say is, Empress Sato III is a bitch. But that is one thing at least good is that Dr. Marcus and her crew are safe. Vanguard and Reyes has been destroyed. I will also recommend that if y'all are curious to see how the events of that Vanguard's destruction turned out, I would recommend getting the compilation novel Shards and Shadows, which has several short stories. One of them involves the destruction of Operation Vanguard. I mean, yeah. To be fair, the fact that Sato II on her deathbed basically told her Hoshi III steer the Empire towards a more noble cause and away from this power grab, and her reaction is to just strangle the life out of her predecessor. Yeah, she's a fucking bitch. Now, and you also see now they're moving from trying to make Spock into an ally to basically just saying, yeah, just murk him. he ain't worth it. Chapter 23. Fortunes of the Bold. Will Decker greeted Admiral Spock as the Vulcan CEO entered the transporter room. Your landing party is ready, Admiral. Spock nodded his acknowledgement as he strode past Decker and stepped onto the platform. Awaiting the Admiral were 4 young Vulcan officers, 3 male and 1 female. all personally selected by Spock to accompany him to the Starfleet Admiralty's strategic conference on Geneva. Lieutenant Zahn, the Enterprise's new science officer, was a boyish-looking young man with long, unruly hair. Ensign Savick, the woman, served as his Alpha Shift flight controller. The other two, Solok and Stang, were lieutenants in the security division. Like the Admiral, the other Vulcans all wore full dress uniforms, which, thanks to their dark gray minimalist styling, looked almost identical to regular duty uniforms, right down to their ceremonial daggers and mandatory sidearms. So yeah, this is the motion picture uniforms. Lieutenant Commander Winston Kyle stood at the transporter control station. "Coordinates locked in, Admiral," he said. "Stand by, Mr. Kyle," Spock said. In his sepulchral tone of voice, he added, "Mr. Decker, please join the landing party." The request caught Decker by surprise. He concealed his alarm. "Me, sir, but I'm not dressed for a formal conference." "A technicality," Spock said. "Overriding protocol is one of the privileges of rank." Decker realized he had become the center of attention in the transporter room. Debating a direct order from Admiral Spock aboard his flagship would only exacerbate the situation. Refusing it was not an option. Decker wondered if Spock knew what had been arranged on the planet's surface, or what Decker's role in it had been. "Aye, sir," he said, stepping up to join the landing party. Moving past the Vulcans, Decker found an available transporter pad at the rear of the platform. In the 6 years since Decker had been demoted by his father to serve as Spock's executive officer aboard the Enterprise, the notorious Vulcan flag officer had made a point to keep Decker at a distance. Except for the most perfunctory communications, Spock rarely conversed with him and generally declined to include him in tactical planning or diplomatic efforts. Spock simply did not trust him. Why should he? I wouldn't if I was him. I'd assume my first loyalty would be to my father. It's a wonder why he hasn't disappeared me like so many others. He still might. Decker's musings were disrupted by Spock's level baritone. "Mr. Kyle, energize." Wrapped in the transporter beam, Decker saw the room swirl with light and color. He unfastened the loop on his phaser for the annual confinement beam and snared him and restrained his movements. The same irrational fear always raced through his thoughts as the dematerialization sequence began. What if being disassembled is actually fatal? What if the person who comes out on the other side is just a copy of me, perfect in every detail, but completely unaware I'm dead and he's a copy? A wash of whiteness brought him up short. Then the swirl of light and euphonic noise ushered him back to himself. Now in a corridor of the Imperial Administration Building in Geneva's capital city. Though he knew he could never prove his idea or disprove it, he still wondered, what if I'm a copy now? What if the person who's stepping onto the transporter pad on the Enterprise is dead? The landing party was in a dim hallway with bare, dark gray walls of smooth, prefabricated material. Open panels on the wall revealed complex networks of wires and optronic cables. A musty odor permeated the cool air, suggesting to Decker that they were underground, in some kind of sub-basement. Recalling the pre-mission briefing, he realized something was wrong. "This isn't where we were supposed to beam in," he said. "Quite correct, Commander," Spock said. "Follow me." Without hesitation, Spock led the group at a quick step down the corridor, then right at a T-shaped intersection. Within a few minutes, he had reached a locked portal marked Auxiliary Security Control. Next to the door was an alphanumeric keypad. Spock stood aside while the four Vulcans gathered at the door and stared at it, as if concentrating on something beyond it. They and Spock all were perfectly still and quiet, and Decker followed their example. Then Savick blinked, stepped forward, and tapped on a long string of characters on digits on the security keypad. The door swished open, and the four young Vulcan officers rushed in, swift and silent. Sharp cracking noises were followed by heavy thuds. Spock walked in the security control center, and Deckard followed him. Four human Starfleet officers lay unconscious on the floor, and Spock's team now occupied the fallen officers' posts. Banks of video screens lined three walls, packed with images from the building's internal security network. Spock and Decker watched as the four Vulcans worked. Finally, Stang turned in his chair to face Spock. There are no other members of the Admiralty in the conference hall, sir. As I suspected, Spock said. He looked at the science officer. Lieutenant Zahn, scan the conference hall for any life signs. Savick, he said. Scan the corridor outside the conference hall for evidence of concealed explosives or other anti-personnel devices. Both officers nodded with acknowledgement and set to work. Decker stood and watched dumbfounded. It was all falling apart. Spock noted Decker's dismayed expression. You appear troubled, Commander. Still trying to make sense of what was happening, Decker said, You came down here expecting a trap? Naturally, Spock said. But why? Folding his hands behind his back, Spock replied, Mr. Decker, in the 10 years I have commanded the Enterprise, I have been forced to suppress 6 mutinies, 2 of them instigated by senior officers. Not on my watch, Admiral, Decker said proudly. True, Spock said. Discipline has improved markedly under your supervision. Regardless, I have been forced on many occasions to defend my command from persons and factions who oppose my methods. Precaution becomes a necessity. Decker couldn't fault Spock's reasoning. From the alleged malfunction of the experimental M5 computer to Grand Admiral Garth's failed ambush of Spock at Elba 2, the Empire has given the Vulcan more than sufficient cause to treat any invitation it pre-offered as being instantly suspect. Ensign Savick turned from her screen report. Explosives have been installed at 1-minute intervals beneath the floor and the main corridor outside the conference hall. Fascinating, Spock said. Then he looked at Zahn. Zahn, sensing the Admiral's attention, turned to face him. 2 life signs inside the conference hall, Admiral, close together in a concealed position opposite the main entrance, both armed with phased plasma rifles. Hi, Triforce. Sniper, Spock said. Lieutenant, can you deactivate the building's transport scramblers from here? Negative, sir, Zahn replied. Doing so will alert the personnel in the primary security control center. Spock raised his voice. Solok, stay. Use the emergency exit stairway to reach the conference hall undetected. Eliminate the 2 snipers. Savick, Zahn, initiate a command override and then execute an intruder protocol inside the primary section security control room. Trigger their anesthetizing gas module. As soon as they are incapacitated, we will return to the Enterprise. Aye, sir. Zok and Savick answered in near unison, while Stang and Solok swiftly exited their auxiliary security control center on the way up to the conference hall. Standing near the door, Decker listened to the retreating footfalls. Inside the room, Spock conferred with Zahn and Savick at the main consoles. All 3 had their backs to him. Slowly, carefully, and as quietly as he was able, Decker drew his phaser from his belt, extended his arm, and leveled his aim. 3 against 1, but I have the element of surprise, he assured himself. This is the best chance I've got. He squeezed the trigger. Nothing happened. He released the trigger and looked at his weapon as if it was a friend who had betrayed him. Wait, thank you for the 7th gift sub. Spock, still facing away from Decker, said, It would seem, Commander, that you are the only member of the landing party who is not aware of the phaser-dampening field inside this room. The Admiral turned to face him. Savick and Zahn swiveled their chairs to do likewise. The door switched closed behind Decker. Panic swelled in his gut as he lowered his sight. Thank you, Mr. Decker, for all your assistance, Spock continued. Without your unwilling complicity, I would have been hard-pressed to ascertain the specific time and place for this assassination attempt arranged by your father. Decker smiled sadly. You know I had no choice, right? One always has a choice, said Spock. Even refusing to decide is still a choice, and choices have consequences. Savick stood and walked slowly towards Decker. Zahn followed a step behind her. Both unshielded their daggers. Not content to let himself be murdered without a fight, Decker drew his own dagger and squared himself for combat. They were so fast, and he felt so slow. He met a lunge with a block, dodged a thrust, slashed at an opponent who had already slipped away. Then, cruel agony. Sharp and cold, steel plunged in his body below his ribs, gouging upwards, ripping him apart from the inside out. The serrated Vulcan blades tore free. He dropped to his knees and clutched his gut. Blood, warm and coppery smelling, coated his fingers. John and Savick stood above him, the blood-slicked blades still in their hands. Spock remained at the far console. All the Vulcans wore the same dispassionate expressions as they watched Decker die. For people from a scorching hot planet, they were the most cold-blooded killers he had ever seen. Decker tried to swallow, but his mouth was dust dry as his throat constricted. "My father will kill you all," he rasped. "It is very likely you will try," Spock said, and then he nodded once to Savick. Another flash of steel landing a stinging cut against Decker's throat. He felt himself slipping away and going dark, and his last thought was felt not at all different from vanishing into a transporter beam. Damn! So Will Decker just... Wow. I feel kind of bad for Decker. In both Prime and Mirror universes, he kind of gets fucked over. "That rotten, scheming Vulcan son of a bitch!" Grand Admiral Matthew Decker hurled an expensive bottle of Romulan ale against the wall of his quarters, showering Commander Hiromi Takeshwada with broken glass and pale blue liquor. A few seconds later, she felt reasonably certain none of the glass had penetrated her eye. A light sweep of her hand wiped the splattered liquid from her sleeve. The Grand Admiral, meanwhile, was almost literally tearing at his gray hair while thumping his forehead heavily against the bulkhead. For all the times that being the first officer of the Grand Admiral Starfleet had been a boon to Takeshwada, moments such as these made the job a horror. Being the one to inform him that his son, Will, had been slain, cut down by Admiral Spock's loyal Vulcan operatives, marked a low point in her military career. Now she had the unpleasant task of delivering a second piece of news to the Grand Admiral. "There's one more thing, sir." His face was scrunched from his efforts to muzzle his grief and fury. Through clenched teeth, he replied, "What is it?" She cast her eyes downward. "The Empress commands you to make contact with her at once." An angry, bitter chuckle rumbled inside Decker's throat. "Of course she does." Takeshwada pointed towards the door. "Should I?" "No," Decker said. "Stay. I want you to hear this, so you can be glad you'll never have to deal with it." Intensive training over the past few years have enabled Takeshwada to suppress any reaction to Decker's almost reflexive insults. At first, his mocking reminders that her career would never advance beyond the current position had grated sorely on her nerves. It was well known that the monarchs of the Sato dynasty had refused for more than a century to grant female officers the rank of admiral. A lucky few had made captain, but such an honor was rare and usually restricted to non-combat vessels. In other words, to ships of little value to the Empire. Takeshwada's own aspirations have never been a secret, and as a result, she has endured continual mockery by her peers and shipmates for more than 2 decades. With the help of Sontor, she had learned how to suppress her emotional reactions to Decker's taunts. No longer did a snarl twist her lip or a grimace crease the corner of her mouth. Her eyes didn't narrow, nor did her face flush with anger when he hurled another of his unthinking japes in her direction. He powered up a private view screen on his desk. "Computer," he said, "establish a secure real-time communication channel to Empress Sato on Earth." "Working," said the computer's masculine synthetic voice. Decker took a few deep breaths while he waited for the channel to open on his screen. He had just composed himself into a semblance of his normally grim, imposing visage when the face of Empress Hoshi Sato III appeared on the view screen. "Grand Admiral Decker," she sounded almost amused. "It is my understanding that the trap you set on Deneva was unsuccessful." He bowed his head like a common supplicant to a throne. Yes, Your Majesty. Admiral Spock anticipated the ambush. I warned you not to underestimate him, Sato said. His promotion of compromise and nonviolence might seem irrational, but I'm beginning to comprehend a method to his madness. Vengeful wrath usurped Decker's demeanor. He's just a man, Your Majesty, and I'm going to kill him. Her voice was hard and unyielding. You will kill him, Admiral, but you will do so because I order it, not for your personal satisfaction. She waited until he bowed his head before she continued. And he's more than just a man. For dissidents and malcontents throughout the Empire, he's become a symbol. The longer he remains free to promote his agenda, the more allies he attracts. He enjoys an unprecedented level of popularity among civilians. My sources warn me that more than half of Starfleet is prepared to follow his banner. Any who follow him are traitors, Decker declared. Any crew that mutinies will be put to death. Really? The Empress tilted her head, again with an imitation of mockery. You are incapable of killing one man, but you're prepared to declare war on half your own fleet? Ambushing Spock is extremely difficult, Your Majesty, Decker said. After today, he'll be even more cautious. It'll take time to prepare another trap. Her tone became one of dark menace. We're long past the time for clever ploys, Admiral. Spock is poised to launch a coup for control of Starfleet. He must be put down immediately. Assemble a fleet and destroy the Enterprise. Act with extreme prejudice. Kill Admiral Spock. Is that understood? Explicitly, Decker said. As she closed the channel, she said simply, Good hunting. Decker activated the view screen and turned his chair to face Takashimada. It was so alive with purpose that he looked reborn. Commander, send on a secure channel to all confirmed loyal ships. Rendezvous at Terra Nova. Await further orders. And start running battle drills. He stood and straightened his posture into one of defiant pride. When we catch up to Enterprise, I want to be ready to blast her to Kingdom Come. A soft hum coursed through the deck of Enterprise's bridge. The ship was cruising at warp 6 towards Zerilia, having made an unhurried departure from Geneva. By now, word has certainly reached Starfleet Command regarding the outcome of Grand Admiral Decker's trap and the fate of the Sun. Though it was possible that Matt Decker and the Empress might choose to regroup following such a setback, Spock doubted they would afford him or his crew such a reprieve. Spock leaned forward in the center seat while reviewing a short list of candidates to succeed the late Will Decker as first officer. He had narrowed the roster to 3 names since his last cup of tea, and much careful consideration now reduced it to 2. Either Lieutenant Commander Winston Kyle or Lieutenant Commander Kevin Riley. He looked up from the data slate in his hand to focus his eyes on points at different distances around the bridge as a relaxing exercise for his fatigued ocular muscles. As his gaze passed the communication station, Lieutenant Elizabeth Palmer turned towards him. Admiral, she said, I'm picking up encrypted signal traffic on multiple Starfleet channels. None of the regular decryption protocols are working. She thought for half a second, she added. It appears the message is intended for all Starfleet ships, except us, sir. Turning towards the opposite side of the bridge, Spock looked at his science officer. Lieutenant Zahn, tie into Lieutenant Palmer's station and help her decrypt the signal from Starfleet. Aye, sir, Zahn replied. 10 minutes passed while Zahn and Palmer worked to decipher the fleet's urgent communiques. Finally, Zahn moved away from his station and stepped down to the upper levels to stand beside Spock's chair. He spoke softly. Admiral, we have decrypted the signals. The message is audio only and is available for your review at my station. In a normal speaking voice, Spock said, Put it on speaker, Lieutenant. Zahn remained calm and replied simply, Aye, sir, and returned to his post. From there, he relayed the message to the bridge's main overhead speaker. A recorded male voice spoke calmly and plainly. Attention all Starfleet ships. This is a direct order from Grand Admiral Matt Decker, commanding the fleet from on board Starship Constellation. All vessels in sectors 1 through 7 are to rendezvous at once in the Terra Nova system. Under no circumstances is any vessel to exchange communications with the starship Enterprise. This is an Imperial directive issued by Emperor Sato III. Further orders will be forthcoming at the rendezvous. Constellation out. Spock arched one eyebrow with curiosity at this turn of events. Glancing to his right, he saw his expression mirrored on Jean's young, clean-shaven face. Nervous looks were volleyed between the non-Vulcans on the bridge. For idle speculation could take root, Spock seized the initiative. Helm, increase speed to warp 9, and set course for Terra Nova. Ensign Savick began punching in the coordinates for the course change, and then she paused and turned to face Spock. Admiral, please confirm. You wish to rendezvous with Grand Admiral Decker's attack fleet. Affirmative, Ensign, Spock said. Even Zahn seemed perplexed by Spock's order. Sir, the fact that Grand Admiral Decker excluded us from the initial transmission and barred the rest of the fleet from communicating with us, would seem to suggest. Yes, I am well aware of what it suggests, Lieutenant. Grand Admiral Decker has been ordered to destroy the ship. First, however, he hopes to intimidate us into retreat, so that he may frame the conflict as one of loyal soldiers versus deserters. Folding his hands against his chest, Spock finished. I will force him to accept a different narrative. One of my choosing. Savick continued to press the debate. Admiral, would it not be prudent to seek reinforcements before confronting an entire fleet of hostile ships? As the ancient Terrans might have said, discretion is a better part of valor. True enough, Ensign, while the ancient Terrans were also fond of a different maxim. Fortune favors the bold. Set course for the Terra Nova system and increase speed to warp factor 9. Enterprise was still more than a light year from the outer boundary of the Terra Nova system when Grand Admiral Decker's attack fleet intercepted it. 10 minutes after Spock's ship had registered on the Constellation sensors, it was met and surrounded, all without a shot being fired. Enterprise didn't attempt a single evasive maneuver. Every scan Decker's crew performed showed Enterprise's shields were down, and his weapons were not charged. The only thing postponing Decker's order for its immediate destruction was a signal of surrender transmitted by Admiral Spock himself, along with a formal request for pardon. Decker didn't like this at all. It smelled like a trap. Lieutenant Palmer, the communications officer, looked up the report. I have Admiral Spock on Channel 1, sir. On screen, Decker snapped. The main viewer wavered and rippled for a moment. Then the visage of Admiral Spock appeared, larger than life. Decker scowled at the Vulcan. Admiral Spock, by the authority of Emperor Sato III, I order you to surrender your command and relinquish control of your vessel. I have already surrendered, Spock replied. Forcing you to destroy the Enterprise will serve no purpose when it can still be of service to the Empire. If Spock had a strategy here, Decker was a senior. Very well, Decker said. Prepare to be boarded. Hardly necessary, Spock said. I am prepared to allow myself to be transported to your ship. It took a moment for Decker to formulate his response. Who said any of this was up to you? You're in no position to... I merely suggest, Spock interrupted, the most logical and least time-consuming alternative. Decker was on the edge of his chair, tense to spring to his feet at the slightest provocation. You're not dictating the terms here, you Vulcan son of a bitch! My apologies, Grandma, Spock said, lowering his head slightly. You wish to accept my surrender in person. What? He didn't know why Spock even had to ask. The protocol of a formal surrender demanded Decker to receive it face-to-face. Yes, of course. Shall I arrange to have myself transported into custody aboard your vessel? Only then did Decker realize what Spock was doing. Though Spock had framed the statements as interrogatives, he still was directing the process of the surrender, usurping Decker's authority. A security detail for my ship will beam aboard your vessel immediately, he said, then continued to keep Spock quiet. If they meet with any resistance, Admiral Spock, any resistance whatsoever, I will not hesitate to destroy your ship and its crew. My guards will escort you back here to my bridge, where I will accept your surrender and pass sentence for your treason against Emperor Sato III. Decker out. He made a slashing motion in Palmer's direction, and the communications officer closed the channel before Spock could sneak in another word. Does seem like it, doesn't it? Commander Tekshawada stepped down from one of the aft consoles and stood beside Decker's chair. The boarding party has just beamed over, sir, she said. They'll notify us the moment they have Admiral Spock in custody. Good, Decker said. Have extra security guards meet them in the transporter room when they get back. Don't take any chances with Spock. He heaved a tired sigh. The sooner we get this over with, the better. As Spock had pledged, no member of his crew interfered with the Constellation boarding. He gave no resistance when the six-man team placed him under arrest and ushered him at phaser point off the bridge of the Enterprise. Now they were aboard the Constellation, Grand Admiral Decker's flagship. Crowded together in the turbolift, deck after deck blurred past, they ascended towards the bridge. The doors opened with a gasp and a swish, and the soft chirps and hums of the bridge, all but identical to those aboard Enterprise, washed over Spock as he was prodded forward out of the turbolift. Constellation was a refit Constitution-class vessel, just like the Enterprise. Only a handful of tiny differences in console layout distinguished the two ships as command centers. Ooh, that stuck up on me. On the main viewer was the image of Emperor Sato III. A string of symbols along the bottom edge of the screen informed Spock this was a two-way transmission being broadcast in real time on an open space frequency. Decker stood beside his chair, facing the turbolift. As Spock and the security detail filed out, the bridge officers who stood next to his or her station, observing Spock as he was led and guided to within a meter of Decker. When the procession came to a stop, boot heels clapped together as the guards snapped to attention and thrust out their arms in salute to the Grand Admiral. Spock saluted him, more out of respect for the rank than for the man. While keeping eye contact with Spock, Decker returned the salute to one and all. Hands pressed down roughly on Spock's shoulders. Kneel, said one of his guards. He was forced to his knees in front of Decker, who glared fiercely down at him. You killed my son, Decker said. Raising one eyebrow, Spock replied, No, sir, my operative slew your son. I merely sanctioned it. Spare me your Vulcan semantics, Decker said. You ordered it. You're responsible. Hand me your agonizer, Admiral. Spock calmly answered. I no longer carry it, nor does any member of my crew. That's a court-martial offense, Decker said. And don't worry, Ethel. I'm making sure to get the drink. I'm gonna have to refill my drink, though. Ugh. Unfazed, Spock said, if you wish to convene a court-martial, I am more than willing to defend my decision. Decker practically quaked with rage. I've heard enough, he said, his disgust evident. Admiral Spock, I order you as a Starfleet officer and subject of the Terran Empire to profess your loyalty to Emperor Sato III before you are put to death, so that you may die with some measure of honor. Speaking boldly for the benefit of those watching via subspace channel, Spock answered, I pledge my loyalty and my life to the Empire. He noticed at the edge of his vision, the Empress was on the view screen, casting a poisonous glare at Decker. He waited for Decker's reaction. It took only a moment. I ordered you to pledge your loyalty to the Empress Sato III, Decker snapped. The Empress and the Empire are one, Spock said. Fealty to one is fealty to both. It is the founding principle of the Empire. Decker sneered. Do you really think this grandstanding will delay your execution, Spock? I think, Spock said, this will all be over in a few moments. Let me go replace my drink. And take this moment to get you all something to drink. I understand that, Void. I shouldn't be having a third soda in the span of 6 hours, but starter cherry soda isn't so good. A screech of phasers, flashes of light, and agonized cries filled the bridge of the Constellation. Security details surrounding Spock dropped to the deck, shot dead. Spock, already aware of what was happening, stayed where he was. Decker cringed, looked around in a sudden panic, and watched his bridge officers act in concert to ambush the security team. It was a mutiny. The Grand Admiral turned and faced Commander Takashawada, whom Spock had cultivated as an ally through his operative saunter. Her resentment to the suppression of her potential had made her a prime candidate for a revolt against the status quo, and her access to information as Decker's first officer had provided Spock with critical intelligence, such as the means to break the Constellation's latest encryption codes. Trapped between Takashawada and Spock, Decker started to lose his stature. He was cowering. "What are you doing, Hiromi?" "Something I should have done a long time ago." The Grand Admiral turned away from his first officer to find Spock, standing tall, surrounded by the charred corpses of the fallen, and gazing down upon him. Mustering the timbre of authority of his rich baritone, Spock declared, "You are relieved, sir." All at once, Decker understood what was transpiring, and straightened himself to a pose of dignity and defiance. Looking Spock in the eye, he answered, "The hell I..." Takashawada fired and burned a hole through Decker's back. He convulsed and twitched grotesquely as he fell face down at Spock's feet. One moment. Douglas going to us. I love my doggos, but they always want to go outside, even after they just came in like 5 minutes ago. But they're big dogs. They love running around outside, so who am I to complain? On the main viewer, Empress Sato III watched with wide-eyed attention but said nothing. The bridge crew of the Constellation looked to Spock for directions. "Stations," he ordered, and everyone leapt into motion. Commander Takashawada, secure from general quarters. Lieutenant Bonner requests status updates from the ships of the fleet. Oh, they're very good doggos. They all like to vie for attention, and some of them, or one of them, don't know their own strength, but they're adorable doggos. They're basically just fully grown puppies. While the officers around him scrambled to collect data and remove the dead bodies from the bridge, Spock settled easily into the center seat and waited, patient and stoic, for word of whether his plan, triggered prematurely by Decker and the Empress's blatant move against him, was unfolding as intended. He passed the minutes looking at the Empress on a screen. For her part, she seemed equally willing to reciprocate his stare. Finally, Takashawada concluded at her conference with Bonner and stepped down into the middle of the bridge, next to Spock. "We have reports from all sectors, sir," she said. "Officers' loyalty has successfully taken control of 61.3% of the ships in Starfleet. The remaining vessels are under control of officers who have expressed a desire to remain neutral. What is the disposition of the other ships in Admiral Decker's attack fleet?" She handed him a condensed report on the data set. "All are with you except for Yorktown and Repulse, but their captains have ordered their crews to stand down." "Very well," Spock said. He stood and took 2 steps towards the main viewer. He put his closed fist to his chest and extended his arm in salute to the Empress. "Your Majesty," he said, lowering his arm. "In accordance with the Imperial Rules of War and Starfleet regulations regarding the criteria for advancement, I hereby assume the rank of Grand Admiral of Starfleet and designate Enterprise as my flagship." It was done. He had thrown down the gauntlet and appointed himself the supreme military commander of the Terran Empire. Now all he could do was await the Empress's response. She could refuse to grant him the title, but to challenge him would spark a civil war. And with the majority of Starfleet supporting his bid for control, and the bulk of the remainder choosing to sit out the confrontation rather than risk becoming caught in the crossfire, the odds favor Spock's triumph. Alternatively, she could implicitly endorse his coup, thereby cementing his hold on power and legitimizing his control of the Empire's vast military arsenal. And she was as shrewd as his observations had led him to suspect she would not elect to plunge her empire into a disastrous internecine conflict. The monarch's neutral expression never changed as she spoke. Grand Admiral Spock, redeploy your fleet to fortify our defenses on the Klingon border near Ajalon, she said. As you command, your majesty, Spock replied. Then, Emperor Sato III added, set your flagship's course for Earth. It is customary for a promotion of this magnitude to be honored with a formal imperial reception. I look forward to welcoming you to my palace on Earth in 7 days' time. Spock bowed his head slightly, then returned to attention. Understood, your majesty. My crew and I are honored by your invitation. Without any valediction, the Empress cut the channel, terminating the discussion. The collective anxiety on the bridge diminished palpably the moment the view screen reverted to the placid vista of a motionless starscape. Spock turned away from his screen. Captain Takashawada, he said, granting an instant promotion to his chief ally on board the Constellation. Take this attack fleet and proceed to the best speed to the Ajalon system. From there, redeploy to secure the border. The Klingons will see this change in our military leadership as an invitation to test our discipline and organization. Encourage them not to try more than once. Aye, sir, Takashawada said. I'll return now to the Enterprise, Spock said. He raised his right hand and spread the fingers in a Vulcan salute. Live long and prosper, Captain Takashawada. And the same to you, Grand Admiral Spock, she said. Then she took her place in the center seat and beamed with pride. He took his communicator from his belt and flipped it once. Spock to Enterprise. It was Lieutenant Zahn who answered. Go ahead, sir. One to beam over, Lieutenant, Spock said. Energize. That ends chapter 23. Yeah, Spock is basically risen to the Grand Admiralty. It's at a point right now where things are heading up and escalating so quickly. Hoshi III has no allies left, effectively. She may have control over Starfleet, but he sure as hell, yeah, basically, she's fucked. Also, interesting to note that Sato, I believe, is the only character left from the Enterprise era that is mentioned or even stated to be in the 23rd century. Which is interesting because Prime Universe counterparts of these characters has survived into the 23rd, and I believe in a couple of cases all the way up to the 24th century. But here, well, you can understand life expectancies are pretty short. Yeah. In the Prime Universe, you have humans that can live to be well over a century old, and not even look anywhere past 40. In fact, Captain Kirk in the Shatnerverse novels, he survives well into the 24th century. Due in part because of what happens in Generations, but more than that as well. And then you've got Dr. McCoy, who in the William Shatner verse actually has not only survived into the 24th century, but he's lived to an age that most humans would actually find a rare age to come to. But I may go further into that one if I actually manage to get my hands on the William Shatner novels. Those have its own Mirror Universe novels, which takes a different turn to what David Mack has envisioned for this version. But now, I think I'll do this next chapter, depending on where it leads. Chapter 24, The end and object of conquest. Enter, said Grand Admiral Spock from the other side of the door to his quarters. It opened, and Saavik stepped inside. As soon as she crossed the threshold, she felt more comfortable. Inside, the light was dimmer and tinted red, the heat was dry and comforting, even the gravity was slightly greater. It was as accurate a facsimile of Vulcan's climate as the ship's environmental controls could create. She stepped farther inside, and the door shut behind her. Saavik turned and saw Spock. His back was to her. He was wearing his full dress uniform, complete with regalia and medals, and standing in front of a mantel on which stood a smoking cone of incense. Without turning to look in her direction, he said, "Join me, ensign." Hands folded together behind her back, she walked slowly to his side. Several seconds passed while she stood beside him. "We have received your transport coordinates from the Imperial Palace," she said, breaking the silence. "They are standing by for your arrival." "I am well aware of our itinerary," Spock said. Duly chastised, Saavik lowered her chin. "I see." This time she respected the silence until he spoke. His eyes remained fixed on the twists of pale smoke rising from the ashen cone of mildly jasmine-scented incense. "Do you know why I asked him to you?" She followed his example and stared at the serpentine coils of dense smoke. "No, sir." "Do you know why the Empress ordered us to Earth?" Elected to eliminate obvious answers, Saavik replied, "To honor your promotion to the Grand Admiral of Starfleet." A soft, low harumph was Spock's first reaction. That was her stated purpose for the invitation. Saavik cast a furtive, sidelong glance at her academy sponsor and mentor. Phrasing her supposition as a statement rather than a question, she said, "You believe the Empress's invitation is a prelude to an assassination attempt?" He gave a brief nod. "I do." "If you're correct," Saavik said, "do you consider her decision as logical? You have, after all, orchestrated a coup of Starfleet and usurped a rank traditionally appointed by the throne." Turning to face her, he replied, "I concede her decision to eliminate me is consistent with her objectives, but as I consider her long-term goal to be untenable, I am forced to conclude the entirety of her agenda and the actions she takes to support it are illogical." "Then the rumors are true," Saavik said. "You intend to challenge her for control of the Empire." His expression betrayed nothing as he stepped away from her to a nearby table, on which sat a tray that held a ceramic teapot and two low, broad cups of matching style. He poured a cup of tea and then lifted it and held it out towards Saavik. She walked over, accepted the tea, and then returned the gesture by filling the other cup and offering it to her. He took it from her with a solemn bow of his head, then sipped the herbal libation together. Finally, he said, "Share your thoughts." Challenging him felt improper. She was a lowly ensign, and he was the supreme military commander of the Empire. At least, he was for the next hour until his audience with the Empress. His invitation sounded genuine, however, so she collected her thoughts and began cautiously. "I am familiar with the predicted future collapse of the Empire," she said, "and I agree that it is not logical to continue expending time, resources, and lives on an entity we know to be doomed." Growing bolder, she continued, "But I have grave misgivings about your proposed solution, Admiral. Many of your ideas seem laudable for the nobility, but I think they will ultimately prove impractical." "Should we instead do nothing?" Spock asked. She put down her tea. "Perhaps the domestic adjustments could be accommodated with a more gradual time frame, but your platform of diplomacy and exclusively defensive power as the basis for a new foreign policy strikes me as politically naive at best and possibly suicidal at worst. And yet, by employing those very tactics within Starfleet, I have amassed more direct support than any officer ever to precede me in this role. Enacting reforms within Starfleet is hardly analogous to effecting a total reversal of the Empire's foreign policy." Setting down his own tea, he asked, "On what do you base your assumption that our adversaries will reject diplomacy, or that renouncing wars of choice will provoke them?" "I have based my arguments on my observations and studies of the Klingons, Cardassians, and Romulans as large-scale political actors," Saavik said. "Each is ambitious and highly aggressive. Historically, none of them have been receptive to diplomatic efforts. As for your civil reforms, the regional governors will certainly revolt, and you might lose much of your current support within Starfleet. He paced slowly away from her and stopped beside a wall in the middle of the cabin. Put aside what you know, Savick, he said, and consider my hypothetical question. If there exists a means by which my power can be assured and my enemies kept at bay, would you support a more logical approach to the governance of the Empire? Hypothetically, arching one eyebrow, she replied, yes. And if I were to place the fate of the Empire in your hands, he said, which path would you choose? The one that was most logical, Savick said, almost as if by instinct. With one hand, he beckoned her. As she stepped over to join him, he reached up towards an empty trapezoidal frame on his wall. He touched its lower right corner, and then its upper right corner. The main panel of the frame slid upward, revealing a small device. Just a screen, a few knobs, a keypad, and a single button set apart in a pale, sea-green teardrop crystal. This, he said, is a control apparatus for an alien weapon known as the Tantalus Field. With it, the user can track the movements of any person, even from orbit. He activated the device and called upon the image of the Emperor sat on the third air throne room on Earth. It can strike even within such protected domains as the Imperial Palace. He pointed at the various controls. These are used to switch targets. These are for tracking. And this one, he pointed at the button inside the teardrop crystal, fires the weapon. It can eliminate a single target as small as an insect, or everyone in the desired zone of effect. To the best of my knowledge, there is no defense. Hello, Bankai. How you doing, friend? Savick stared at the device, transfixed by the macabre genius of it. Undoubtedly, this had been the secret of Spock's swift ascent to power, and the source of the legends about his terrifying psionic gifts. And she realized knowing this about the Tantalus Field might make her a liability to him. Admiral, she asked carefully, why are you showing me this? Because, Savick, when I meet with the Empress, you will have three choices. He stepped close to her, invading her personal space and towering over her. 1. Serve your own agenda. Let the Imperial Guards kill me, then take the Tantalus Field device for yourself. 2. Assassinate me yourself and try to curry favor with the Empress. Or 3. Defend me from the Empress and help me initiate the logical reformation of the Empire. The choice is yours. It took several seconds before Savick understood the exact nature of the responsibility Spock had just entrusted to her. He was one of the most powerful men in the Empire, and he was about to make himself infinitely vulnerable to her whim. It was one of the most illogical decisions she had ever seen a Vulcan make. I do not understand, Admiral, she said. You would actually trust me to remain here alone with this unspeakably powerful weapon? You would entrust your life to my goodwill? No, Savick, he replied. I am trusting my life to your good judgment. Logic alone should dictate your correct course. He frowned and then continued. We live in a universe that tends to reward cruelty and self-interest, but I have seen irrefutable evidence that a better way exists, and if our civilization is to endure beyond the next 2 centuries, we must learn to change. His assertion fueled her swelling curiosity. You say you have seen irrefutable proof. What was that proof, Admiral? A mind meld, he said. The human from an alternate universe, one much like our own. He lifted his hand and gently pressed his fingertips against her temple and cheek. Open your mind to me, and I shall share what I have seen. He had already volunteered so many secrets that Savick saw no reason for him to lie now about his intentions. She lowered her psionic defenses one layer at a time and permitted his mind to fuse with her own. And then she saw it. Flashes of memory. A third mind. Fleetingly touched, but now forever imprinted in Spock's psyche. Another Dr. McCoy. A man of compassion and mercy. From a Starfleet whose officers don't kill for advancement, but are willing to die to protect each other. A federation founded on justice, equality, and peace. And, like the Terran Empire, beset by powerful, dangerous rivals. But unlike the Empire, this federation amasses its strengths by means of consensus and alliances of mutual benefit, and it assuages its wants and its injuries through mutual sacrifice. Stable, prosperous, strong, free. Spock withdrew the touch of his mind and his hand, leaving Savick with the lingering images of the alternate universe. It was no psionic illusion. It was genuine, just as Spock had said. It was irrefutable, and yet it was not this universe. Its lessons, its ideals, they weren't of this reality. To think two such divergent universes could belatedly be steered onto the same course struck Savick as dangerously wishful thinking. She was still considering her reaction when Spock stepped back from her and said, "The choice is yours." Then he walked away out the door to keep his appointment with the Empress. With a few simple turns and taps of the device's controls, Savick conjured an image of Spock on its viewer. She watched him stride through the corridors of the Enterprise, on his way to the transporter room, and not at all resembling a man willingly walking into a trap. I could eliminate him right now, she realized, her fingers lightly brushing the outline of the teardrop crystal. No one would ever know. Ultimate power lay in Savick's hands. She had less than 5 minutes to decide what to do with it. Flanked by a trio of his most trusted Vulcan bodyguards, Spock rematerialized from the transporter room beam. He and his men were on the edge of a vast plaza at the gargantuan arched entryway on the southern side of the Imperial Palace. The polished titanium of the massive dome structure reflected the lush green vista of the Okinawa countryside, and the legion of black and red uniformed soldiers stand at attention in formation in the plaza. Spock's left, he turned to face the ranks of the Imperial shock troops, as 1,000 of men brought their fists to their chest, then extended their arms in formal salute. He returned the salute, and then turned and entered the palace proper, his guards close behind. Like so many edifices dedicated to human vanity, the palace is a conspicuous waste of space and resources. Thoroughfares that recede to distant points were bordered by walls ascending to dizzying heights. From the floors to the lofty arches of the ceiling, the interior of the palace appeared to have been crafted entirely of ornately gilded marble. In contrast to the muggy, hazy summer air outside, the atmosphere inside the palace was crisp and cold and odorless. Heavy doors of carved mahogany lined the cathedral-like passageway, and on either side of every door stood 2 guards, more Imperial shock troops. A steady flood of pedestrians hurried in crisscross paths, all racing from one bastion of bureaucracy to another, bearing urgent missives, relaying orders, coming and going from meetings and appointments. Then a booming voice announced over a central public address system. "Attention!" The madding throng came to a halt. "Clear the main passage for Grand Admiral Spock." As if cleaved by an invisible blade, the crowd parted to form a broad channel through the center of the passageway, and an anti-grav skiff glided quickly towards Spock. Its pilot was another member of the Imperial Guard. He guided the skiff to a gliding stop in front of Spock, finishing with a slow turn so that the open passenger side seat faced the Grand Admiral. "Good morning, sir," he said. "I'm here to escort you to Her Majesty, Emperor Sato III. Spock nodded his assent, climbed aboard the skiff, and sat down. His guards occupied the rear bench seat. The vehicle accelerated smoothly, finished its turn, and sped back the way it had come. The corridor and the faces that filled it blurred past. Less than a minute later, the skiff arrived at the towering duranium doors of the Imperial throne room. Waiting there for Spock was his entourage, whose members the Empress had summoned in a more formal invitation than she had extended during Enterprise's journey to Earth. Lieutenant Commander Kevin Riley, the newly promoted first officer of the ISS Enterprise, Lieutenant Zahn, Dr. Diablo Mbenga, and the Chief Engineer, Commander Montgomery Scott. Spock and his bodyguards debarked up from the skiff. After a curt greeting, he directed his men simply, places. He took his place at the head of the procession, with his bodyguards in tight formation around him. Riley and Scott formed the next rank, followed by Jean and Mbenga. Spock signaled his senior Imperial Guard that he was ready. After relaying the message ahead onto the throne room, the guard received his orders from his superiors, and he turned to face his men. Open the door and announced the Grand Admiral. Resounding clangs from the release of magnetic locks inside the enormous metal doors vibrated the marble floor beneath Spock's feet. He lifted his chin proudly, but kept his expression neutral. The doors parted and swung inward. Golden radiance from the other side spilled out in long, angled shafts. In the blink of his inner eyelid, his sight adjusted to the luminous appointments of the throne room. A great fanfare sounded, and a herald stepped in front of the door and faced the throne. Your Majesty, presenting his martial eminence, Grand Admiral Spock, Supreme Commander of your Imperial Armed Forces. Another fanfare blared as Spock stepped to the doorway, trailed by his rotund. The Imperial Court was resplendent with trappings of gold and crimson. Legions of Imperial shock troops manned the upper balconies from which were draped gigantic red and gold banners emblazoned with the Imperial icon. The earth impaled on a broadsword, stabbed through the heart by his own martial ambitions. The expansive lower concourse was crowded with couriers, pages, personal bodyguards, foreign ambassadors, imperial advisors, and members of the cabinet. Several planetary governors were also present. Among them, Kodos of Tarsus IV, Oxmix of Sigma Lotia IV, and Placis of Ardana. The majority of the guests hovered around the overfilled banquet tables like vultures feasting on a killing field. While covered in damask were lined with portraits of members of the royal family, but none were so commanding in their presence as the ones that were holographically projected behind the throne at the far end of the Great Hall. 20 meters high, the trio of high-definition likenesses formed the portrait of a dynasty in the making. Empress Hoshisato I, Empress Hoshisato II, and Empress Hoshisato III, the currently reigning imperial monarch, resided from her throne high atop a truncated half-pyramid of stairs, surrounded by another company of her elite guards. Spock and his rotund marched in solemn strides towards the throne. Quickly, the crowd formed itself into orderly rows, aligned by rank. Thunderous applause swelled and became almost deafening as Spock continued forward. The Empress and her soldiers, however, remained still and silent. The broad base of the stairs to the Empress's platform was surrounded by a 10-meter-wide border of obsidian floor panels, polished to perfection. Their glassy black surface reflected Spock's weathered visage with such clarity that I could see every graying whisker in his goatee. It was there that a quartet of Imperial guards blocked him in his rotund. The captain of the guard said gruffly, "Grand Admiral Spock, by order of Her Imperial Majesty, from here you proceed alone." Then he motioned for Spock to follow him up the stairs toward the throne. Spock passed through the invisible energy barrier that protected the Empress's throne. A galvanic tingle coursed over his skin and bristled the hairs on the back of his hands. Once he was on the other side, he heard a subtle hum, gently rising in tone, as a force field returned to the full strength behind him. As he had suspected, a small gap had been opened only long enough to grant him ingress to the Empress's inner circle. Now that he was separated from his bodyguards, they would be unable to intervene when the Empress gave the order for her troops to execute him. Directed energy weapons, projectiles, and most other forms of ranged armaments could not penetrate the shield in either direction, and because Imperial law forbade him from bearing arms into the presence of the Empress, he would have no means of defending himself. He climbed the stairs without hesitation. 10 steps from the top, Empress Sato's voice commanded him. "Halt!" Spock genuflected before the Empress. "Welcome, Grand Admiral Spock," she continued. "This court is honored by your august presence." Because she did not bid him to rise, he remained on one knee. "It is I who am honored, Your Majesty, by your most gracious invitation, and by the opportunity to serve the Empire as its Grand Admiral. Irritation colored her words. My dear Admiral, I believe you have misspoken. You serve me, not the Empire at large. I am your sovereign. I acknowledge you are the sovereign ruler of the Empire, Spock replied, but I have not misspoken. Her mouth curled into a smirk, but anger flashed in her eyes. Your reputation is well earned, she said, her demeanor hostile and mocking. A rogue, that's what Grand Admiral Decker called you. Before him, Grand Admiral Garth of Izar labeled you a radical, a free thinker. Now I hear rumors you see yourself as a reformer. I'm pretty sure Void can see your comment, Triforce. I have been, remain, and will continue to be all those things, Spock admitted. She abandoned the artifice of sarcasm and spoke directly. Your penchant for compromise troubles me, Spock. Negotiation and diplomacy are tools of the weak. Quite the contrary, Spock said. Only from a position of strength can one afford to— Silence! She snapped. Having someone of your temperament as Grand Admiral is a threat to the security of the Empire. It will invite attack by our enemies, both internal and external. How can the Empire be assured of its safety when its supreme military commander is an avowed appeaser of its rivals? Looking directly and unabashedly at the Empress, he replied, Every action I have taken has been grounded in logic. I have never acted to the benefit of our enemies, but only to serve the best interests of the Empire and its people. Empress Sato III blinked in disbelief, as if Spock had just committed a grievous faux pas. The people, she said, with obvious contempt. She rose from her throne and descended the stairs towards it. Her guards advanced quickly behind her, weapons at the ready. Since when do the people matter, Spock? The people are fodder, a source of revenue to be taxed, a pool of raw material to be kept ignorant and afraid, until I need them to be angry and swell with pride. With a sneer, she added, The people are pawns. Their best interests are irrelevant. She climbed back to the top of the stairs, then turned and glared at him with all the haughty grandeur she could muster. As irrelevant as you, my dear half-breed. Raising her arm, she called out, Guards! Weapons were brought to bear with a heavy clattering sound. Spock kept his attention on the Empress, ignoring the dozens of phaser rifles aimed at him from every direction. A flare of light and a crackle of blistering heat. Spock gazed into the blinding brilliance, stoic in the face of sudden annihilation. Then a sharp bite of ozone filled his nose, and a warm breath of air passed over him. He heard the gasps of the crowd beyond the force field. Empress Sato and her company of elite guards were gone. Not a trace of them remained. Not scraps of clothing, not ashes, nothing at all. Spock stood, turned, and gazed intently at the legions of guards in the upper balconies. Another pulse of pure white incandescence erupted on every balcony, leaving only the silhouettes of skeletons to linger for a moment in the afterglow. Blinks of stutter stepped through the crowd of the hall, finding every Imperial guard in the throne room. Within seconds, it was over. For a moment, all anyone below could do was look around in horror, dumbstruck with fright at this invisible blitzkrieg. Then inevitably, all eyes gazed upwards towards Spock. He turned away from the crowd, climbed the stairs, seated himself upon the throne, and he waited. Then, from far below, outside the protective energy barrier, sounded a man's solitary voice, one Spock didn't recognize, repeating a lonely declaration in the echoing vastness of the great hall until his voice was joined by another, then by several more, and finally by the booming roar of a crowd fervently and in unison. All hail Emperor Spock! With two gentle touches of Savic's hands, the panel slid closed over the Tantalus Field Device's control panel. Seemingly unperturbed by the momentous and pivotal role she had just played in the fate of the Empire, she walked calmly out of Spock's quarters. The door hissed closed and locked behind her. Concealed behind a false panel in the bulkhead opposite the secret weapon, Marlena Moreau breathed a tired sigh. She was greatly relieved to know Savick was loyal to Spock. It would make it easier for her to trust the young Vulcan woman from now on. If the targeting cursor of the Tantalus field had fallen for even a moment upon Spock's image, Marlena had been ready to strike instantly, a phaser set on kill steady in her hand. Though she was now ashamed she had doubted Spock's judgment over his protege, she was still frightened by his willingness to trust other people too much. She loved and admired his idealism, even as she cursed its inherent risks. Oof. Needed to take a moment to take a nice drink. Oof. Shouldn't be going long passages like that.
Good luck going after our fans. We have a Hunter's
Yes.
meal at McDonald's.
You mean the Saja Boys breakfast meal?
Marlena emerged from behind the panel. Over the years, she had gradually become accustomed to the higher temperatures and gravity such quarters she shared with
It's a
Spock.
battle for the fans.
The aridity, however, continued to vex her. She tried to limit the time she spent there, preferring to pass her 3 hours in the ship's library or its astrometrics
Pick a
laboratory.
side. Don't fight.
She eyed her reflection in the wall mirror and was able to tell herself honestly that so far, the years have been kind to her. Spock, on the other hand, was already showing signs of the extreme stress inflicted by his rapid campaign to seize control of the Starfleet.
Right, there was the second one.
What? Hear what? Under my voice. An ad? That's weird because there's nothing else playing in my background. Oh, wait a minute. Don't tell me. Oh, god damn it. I found out what it was. For some reason, I found out what it was. For some reason, I had a tab from another streamer on. That's what it was. I'm sorry about that. Let's see. Where was it? Now, less than a week after his decade-long effort had come to fruition, he had succeeded in placing himself upon the Imperial throne. He was the Emperor. Everything was changed now. Marlena could only imagine the toll that reigned over an interstellar empire would take on her beloved husband, and she feared for his health and his life. There were bound to be operatives loyal to the Sato dynasty who would seek retribution. Even with the Tantalus field, how could she and Spock hope to find and eliminate them all? It seemed impossible. We'll find a way, she promised herself. We have to. A thought occurred to her. She pulled open the closet and surveyed its contents. Dismayed, she realized that Spock's great achievement had caught her totally unprepared. Damn! 50 outfits to choose from, and not even one is remotely good enough. She shut the closet. I'm not ready to be an empress yet. In 2 regal strides, she was at the wall panel. With a push of her thumb, she opened the channel to the bridge. Moments later, she was answered by Lieutenant Finney, whose youthful voice shook with an undercurrent of fear. Bridge here. This is the Emperor's consort, she said, liking the sound of it as soon as she said it. Have the Imperial tailors sent to my quarters immediately. Right away, Your Majesty, Finney said, sounding like a scolded child. Bridge out. Despite her best efforts of equanimity, a slight insane smile and wide-eyed mask of glee took over Marlena's face. Even after catching sight of her Cheshire cat grin in the mirror, she couldn't suppress it. Just as she always suspected, it was good to be queen. That was chapter 24. Now we saw what all that was culminating in. We saw Spock rise to the captaincy of the ISS Enterprise, rise to the ranks of the Admiralty, and now we see Spock seated upon the Imperial throne of the Terran Empire. Spock has succeeded. He is the Emperor. Now, on the Imperial throne, he will be able to dictate the reforms that he has been pushing for since he slain Captain Kirk. However, I think I'm going to call it for right now. It's fine, people. Depending on how things go within the next couple of hours, I may do another stream. We'll see, though. But for now, I think I'm gonna raid someone I haven't raided in a long time. As long as I have it spelled right. We're going to go raid Jazz. I do appreciate everyone for joining me. I definitely enjoyed reading this novel. And until next time, everyone, I am Turok. And I will see you all next time. Have a good day, everyone.